Good afternoon. I see our attendees have started to sign in. We are just going to allow for a moment for the rest of the attendees to sign in with us today. While we do that, I'm going to ask you to please make use of the chat function. Just pop us a message with your name and where you are signing in from this afternoon. We are going to begin the session shortly. So while we give the rest of the attendees the opportunity to sign in, please, can you just pop us a message in the chat function? Let us know who you are and where you are signing in from. This is lovely. We have Annie from Sweden joining us again. Welcome, Annie. We have Pastor UNISA from the Eastern Cape. We have Lorna from KwaZulu-Natal. We have Teresa from Stellenbosch University. Welcome, everyone. Tracy from Pretoria. For those of you who have just signed in, we are just making use of the chat function to say who we are and where we are signing in from. Nicola from UCT. Welcome, everybody. I think it is Morache from Pretoria. I hope I've said your name correctly. We have Shirley from Johannesburg, Landile from KwaZulu-Natal. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I think we are ready to begin. Just before we start, I see we have Lawrence from Embassy of Switzerland for Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Okay, everyone, with that being said, I would like to introduce our MC for today, Pastor UNISA Ka. UNISA is an ordained minister in the Full Gospel Church. She has been a full-time minister for the last 14 years. She's a CPSC Level 5 religious professional. UNISA holds a master's degree in theology, dogmatics at Northwest University. In 2017, she was awarded the NWU Linti de Lange Trophy for Best Ethics Students by the Faculty of Theology. She is currently serving as the Vice President for the Golden Key International Society Alumni Committee in the Eastern Cape. Her hobbies include doing karate, mixed martial arts, singing, songwriting, and doing research. Her passion is to help individuals achieve their goals. She loves being involved in community upliftment. UNISA's motto in life is never give up. Over to you, UNISA.
Good day, everyone. Welcome at this wonderful session 5 of the Gender-Based Violence webinar series. This is session 5 of 11, and the topic today is manhood, masculinities, and gender-based violence. This webinar series is in collaboration with UNISA, Father in Nation, Vitality Wellness, and SAfAIDS, and we are very excited for every fact and piece of knowledge that have been birthed from this collaboration. We look forward to not only providing knowledge, but also bringing awareness as well as strategies to put into place in order to curb this terrible violence against humankind, and in order to bring about change and solution finding. So that is what our mission is, and we are so happy to have you with us. You are so special to us, and together we will walk this journey. We are going to now introduce to you the 2 speakers for today. Our first speaker is Leon Roots, and I will be reading his biography for you. He is from UNISA. He's the representative from UNISA. Welcome, Leon. Your biography will be read now. Leon Roots is the program convener of postgraduate program of social and behavioral studies for HIV/AIDS within the Department of Sociology. He's also the program manager of Teresano Collaborative Project, focusing on the advocacy of diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion in communities, curriculum, and workplaces. Currently, he is the convener of the university's Employee Health and Wellness Working Group and has been involved in this field in various sectors over years, including the development of workplace policy and program frameworks. His MA focused on pathways to manhood, while he's currently working on his PhD, which will present some guidelines on how to implement male-friendly employee health and wellness workplace programs which is very necessary. He also served as chairperson of SAfAIDS South Africa between 2015 till 2020 and provided strategic advice and support to different organizations in both the public and private sector on HIV health and wellness. We welcome you here today, Leon. Thank you very much from UNISA. Our next speaker is Ngoni from SAfAIDS. We would like to welcome him here today in this wonderful collaboration. Ngoni Chibukiri is a holder of a master's degree in economics, UZ 1998, and has over 20 years experience in SRHR, HIV and GBV programming, including research and health economics. This expertise manifested in over 20 years of experience in SRHR, HIV, TB, and health-related programming, budget tracking and reporting, monitoring and evaluation and reporting, partnership management, human resources management, governance, and resource mobilization. Ngoni has excellent skills and knowledge in conceptualization, design, implementation, and results-based reporting on programs across the Southern African region, working with non-governmental organizations, government departments, and the private sector. Ngoni was instrumental in SAfAIDS workplace program that consolidated his skills in needs assessment, material development, donor mobilization, strategic planning, and regional events coordination. Ngoni has adopted diligent, organized, and creative approaches to facilitating programs at country and regional level. Ngoni has been appointed to several government, private, and non-governmental bodies: HIV technical work groups, wages and salaries advisory board, tripartite negotiating forum, business leaders forum, national manpower advisory council. This is where he served, interministerial technical census committee as well. He's also been on the labor committee and jobs for Africa team, which further attests his dedication to scaling up improved SRHR programming. We welcome you to this session today, Ngoni, and we can see that we've got a wonderful panel, and we look forward to the information that will be shared. I just want to address the attendees today. We are going to go into a dialogue today with the attendees, and we would love for you to post your questions in the Q&A function, and I'm going to read to you the main question which we will be focusing on today. So attendees, especially for you to post your questions in the Q&A, here is the main question that we will be focusing on. We will also elaborate on some sub-questions, but the main question for today is, what will make a man and people associated with manly characteristics today feel as part of addressing gender equality in households, community, society, and the workplace? I'm going to read it for you once again. What will make a man and people associated with manly characteristics today feel as being part of addressing gender equality in households, communities, societies, and the workplace? So that gives you something to digest and to think about. Please post your questions on the Q&A function, and I'm going to hand over to the presenters now, after which we will get into the dialogue. Thank you, Leon. I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Vanita. And I think we're going to have a very interesting time. So I would like to just also add, please engage with us in the Q&A, posting questions, not only that we as a panelist should engage you with, but even as participants talking to each other, so that we can really make it a full dialogue experience for you. Because we have seen in the past, a lot of colleagues have asked us, how do you facilitate like a men's dialogue? And I hope that after today's session, you get a bit of a feel, how do we do this kind of thing? So the first step in a dialogue like this is to set the scene. And normally you can do it through various ways, by a guest speaker, a life story, a video, expertise, or even a poem or a song. And that allows to set the direction of the conversation, that you then bring on board other people who, like Ngoni, who's every day also working in this field of this topic, to actually start talking about real life experiences, so that we can really talk, or not only from the head, but from the mind and the soul, from the heart and the soul too. So this is the kind of conversation we'd like. We have posted the main question in the chat for you, just to remind you that Juanita was reading it out to you, but it's there. So please engage with us in these two spaces, Q&A and the chat, so that we really make it very meaningful for you to also be with us. So just to start opening the conversation about the main question, it starts off with the question about what makes you a man today, and where does the notion of being a man come from? And we cannot disconnect this notion of what a man is without looking back in the history, that the notion of men has been shaped by historical events, but also by power relationships that came around through different historical moments because of how the economy was shaped, how the social hierarchy was shaped, but also how the relationship between genders was shaped. And I think this is something that we sometimes neglect in our current conversations when we talk about masculinity, which is sometimes a very Western understanding of manhood. For me, in the African context, manhood is much more meaningful because it talks about a personhood, and personhood is the African philosophy of understanding of who we are, because our personhood is embedded in the values of humanity. And that means before I am a man, or before I am a woman, or before I am any of the other genders, I am first human. And that is the bottom line where we have to start this kind of conversation. We have to interrogate why some of the things like gender-based violence are actually become thriving in the times we live in now. And the big question is it not because we have been removed ourselves from the sense of humanity? Have we become inhumane with each other in such a way that we even use means of violence to assert ourselves in our society? And this is it. And I don't want to present as if we have answers for these things. These things are so deep-rooted that you have to, as a man, as a woman, or as other genders, and we will talk about the other genders briefly, we have to interrogate ourselves, because it starts with our own reflection of how we see ourselves. How do we see ourselves as a man today? And where does it come from, and what shapes us to actually understand ourselves better, but also how we see ourselves with other men? Because if we like it or not, our whole perception of who we are still very much shaped by other men. And I will come back to that. So there's a lot of arguments on the table that say there's a traditional way that society is seeing and looking at what expected from men, but that has changed dramatically over the last few decades, because there's a huge shift in the gender space. Now, to understand this shift, we need to go back even to spaces of pre-colonial Africa. And pre-colonial Africa was a space where there was not such a clear distinguishment between men and women as we see in the latest few decades of our history. Because in the pre-colonial time, the African culture was of such a nature that it focused on the collectiveness of everyone, and that everyone was like a body part of a body. So it didn't matter if you were a man or a woman, if you were the hand or the mouth or the head or the feet. But the idea was that you had a role to play in the collectiveness, to make the collectiveness work together in harmony, like a body, as we all have body parts if you look at yourself. And that is how traditionally, even pre-colonial structures have viewed men and women, that it was not specifically towards gender roles like we have seen later evolving. Because the sad thing is, with colonialism, there came a thing called categorization of humans. And in that space, we saw suddenly what happened was with slavery, and we saw a lot of oppressive practices, dehumanization, histories, and things like that come into being. And people were categorized. They were categorized as people who who were seen as human, and then some groups of people were seen lesser human, and even some categories were seen as non-human. And you can go into the history of gender and you'll pick it up, that categorization created then this power relationship between what we know now and we talk about men and women, that suddenly it gave rise to the whole thing that one category was put above the other, and it gave it power to oppress or even to dehumanize the other. And because pre-colonial, there is a lot of histories that we don't talk about in Africa, and as young people and as people of Africa, we need to really Africanize this conversation by reading much more of our African histories and our African authorship. Because out of the literature, it came out, there's a rich history of the queens of Africa, that there were queens that reigned across the regions of Africa. And we don't find their stories, we don't find the richness of their reigns and their wisdom that was present, that we can draw upon to understand what we need to do in our society today. And that makes it that there's a huge gap in our history that we need to also start to redress as we start to look at redressing the issue of manhood. So there's a lot of things there, that how wars were actually between tribes took place with queens, versus when we see when patriarchy arose, and then suddenly we see this kind of male dominance arise. Because there is a historical moment in our history when that shift happened, when Africa became predominantly male dominant, patriarchal, and in many spaces even gender equal. It can be connected to some extent to the colonial histories, because the colonialism brought in this power relationship of owning somebody and actually oppressing somebody, and then to dehumanize the person to a level that they don't even exist and do not have even a self-centeredness, that it was broken down because of the power relationship between the colonialist and the people who have been affected by colonial powers and things like that. And sadly, that history still plays out today, that we still see in many spaces. We are living in a society across Africa that still categorize the humanity that we live in, that there's certain categories of people who are in spaces of oppression, spaces of still denouncing the humanity of other people, spaces where they actually have access to resources and access to wealth and access to a lot of privileges. And we need to interrogate it in this space. Some of the histories could be racial background, some could be tribal backgrounds, some could be even religious backgrounds, because we can never underestimate the influence of Christianity in Africa and how Christianity actually reinforced some of these power relationships. Even culture, that tribalism was there. And you remember in 1934, and it was done in Germany, sitting around the table, the lines were drawn by the colonial powers to say, these are the borders of Africa, and this is how Africa is divided. And that's why we struggle with our history now, that we have things like xenophobia even, because we suddenly are demarcated our own tribes within the boundaries of geographical borders and spaces. So this plays also out when it comes to manhood issues, because in the manhood space, in the womanhood space, there was traditional ways of bringing you from your childhood to the personhood in a way. That's the moment when your tribe, your culture, your organization start to recognize you as a responsible person. And not only on the basis because you are taking care or providing, but because of your role in the collectiveness. And that means that suddenly, not suddenly, but over a whole set of rituals, a whole set of social acceptance procedures that took over times of periods, intervals, that suddenly people in your community start to say, now we recognize you are a man, you're not anymore a boy. Or now you are a woman, you're not anymore a girl. And sadly, as we are also now exposed to so many other cultures across the world through modernization, globalization, but also through this kind of categorization of power across people that's still alive and actually still divide us in our own continent, we see that this plays now a role that even within that personhood process, there is a sense of confusion and a sense of loss that we, most of us experience, because there's not always somebody in our life that affirm that you have reached that stage of personhood, of manhood, of womanhood. And some of us, because of single families, because of child-headed families, or been raised by our extended families, those things didn't always take place, because also the history of like migration, of people have to leave their families to go and work somewhere else, that then the families become disjuncture. And that causes that again, the power relationships have shifted and changed. And then that caused this kind of thing, that suddenly we see this economic shift happening. Then there's also other factors that plays today out that we cannot deny. And that is that we are in Africa, the biggest challenge is urbanization. It's not so much poverty. It's not so much even a space like violence, of what are some of these things that really trigger these kind of antisocial behaviors, if I can put it like that. You come to the conversation of space and connectivity. And you start to see that as we start to get through all these kind of historical disruptions, we see that the movement of people, we see also the closeness of people, and we also see at the end of the day exposure across now religion, across culture, across social expectations, bring us in a state of confusion, and it brings us in a stage of sometimes feeling loss. And that means we lose a sense of belonging and lose a sense of identity even. So when we look at manhood and the pathways of manhood, that shifted from a very big ritual that took place. Some of you may recall in your culture, what was the ritual? I mean, in some cultures, it was the circumcision period, that a man was circumcised, and through that was already a step into the manhood path. But there was also a social celebration when you had to go through initiation, and then you get out of it, and then we celebrate that you are now a man. You can get married, you can provide, you can take care, because society gives you that permission, society gives you that acceptance. And all of us, doesn't matter from where we come, what culture, we had it to some extent. And religion in many ways go hand in hand, because religion also recognizes that ritual. When you go to a church, there's a phase that you are not seen as part of a congregation because you are too young, and then there's a ceremony that takes place to acknowledge you as a member of a congregation. And these are all the rituals that comes into play that we traditionally had, and we lost it. We don't do that in our families or our households anymore for various reasons, that we are too busy. We are saying, no, it's traditional. We don't want to be so traditional. And we like more of the modern spaces that we see now with celebrities becoming our role models. But in that way, we often disconnect what is sometimes good from traditional, and we could have used it to actually create new meaning to us to understand ourselves better today. So the shift in our space as manhood, that is that still for men across all cultures, the ability to be employed, to be economically able to provide and to protect is one of the biggest forces still of being seen ourselves as a man. And that is sometimes the big challenge with across the continent, high level of youth unemployment, because there's not only inequality between men and women in that space, but also between older men and younger men. Because the older men are often the ones that have then predominantly these economic powers. And then the younger men, in a way, are waiting for the affirmation, confirmation of an older man to say, I accept you as a man. In South Africa, we got a very good example of relationship between the previous president, Jacob Zuma, and Julius Malema, that up to now, the president never ever have actually affirmed Julius Malema as a man. When he ever spoke in parliament, he was also referring to my boy. And we see that in many spaces that this is still happening, that older men actually make sure that younger men knows their place in society by just saying my boy or my youngster. That kind of even language terminology that we use. The other thing that is busy shaping our manhood is then the older men. And this is the phenomenon of the blesser, where we see that older men who have these economical powers also often have the social powers. And in relationships with younger women, that we start to see that our younger women are inclined to find ways that they want to be economically independent. They want to be in a space that somebody provides, take care of them, and then they are more favorable for these kind of relationships that are not always equal, because these relationships are also based on agreements and even on kind of unequal power relationships. We start to see then also the rise of what we call the sugar mummy. Because the sugar mummy is then the mummy that actually provides money for sexual favors. She gives money and means to him economically to actually date then women of the same age. Because now this young man has money, he can take out the young woman to places that she liked to go, and he can afford some of the things that the older men are providing to the younger woman. But it becomes a vicious cycle if you can think about blesser, sugar mummy, young women, young men playing in a circle with each other. And that raises a big question, how the older generation is being a man or a woman. So then it's also to do with women. Women are still predominantly the genders that actually shape our manhood. And sadly, in many ways, it has become very materialistic, very a kind of a Western way of looking at what is a man from a woman's perspective. Yes, we want men to be still providers and protectors because that was traditionally socialized in our minds and in our ways of living. But at the same time, we want this modern man. We want this man that is able to connect with his emotions, is also believing in women empowerment, inequality. And then it goes skewed to the other side, that suddenly I'm against men. And that's where you find this kind of feminism trends that are arising, that mostly come from the West, because African feminism is never about oppressing men. It's never about not recognizing that we strive for gender equality, not to try to put the one above the other, but it's about really finding that the two genders can coexist and collectively actually move forward. But our women are also in many spaces, specifically, sadly, our young. You just have to look at like the increased rate of teenage pregnancy. Then you start to see that that kind of spaces become also equal, because most of the children currently, the statistics have shown us that there's like 14,000 in Gauteng teenage pregnancy at hospitals reported, I want to re-emphasize, of between 12 and 14 years. So statutory, they are children, and who is then the one that makes them pregnant? And the study has shown that it's not same age, as sometimes people like to popularly tell, that they say it's the same age kind of relationship that people, young children, start to have earlier sex. It's not that. It's still older men, and it's often younger men who are unemployed that come into that kind of spaces too. And it's not to find blame for these things, from the blame and find the answers deeper. We also see then how does religion shape our manhood, because religion is actually in many ways, if you look at your church, a church hierarchy, you know, how the hierarchy is structured not only between men and women, but also between different kinds of men. When I use or the what is the other word, but you know how that plays a role on age, socioeconomic status, family status. If you're married and you have children, you are seen as a bit of a higher hierarchy than the single man who is not married and don't own a car or don't own a property. We see that within men, there's even hierarchies like that playing out. And sadly, the church keep on reinforcing these kind of categories of power by doing these kind of hierarchical structures. And again, historically, Africa was never hierarchical. It was never hierarchical. I can pull for you evidence, and I can say to you with confidence, and I am in very much in the decoloniality space and African space, it has never been hierarchical as it is now. So it means Africa was always in a circular process. It was a flat, linear power relationship. It was never seen as hierarchical, that people are above other people, even in the kingships. If you truly study the Imbizo understanding, you'll see the Imbizo means that the king comes sit under the tree with the elders, with the community, and he's part of a conversation, he's part of a solution. Yes, there was roles to play as a collective, but at the end, there was not seen as a hierarchy like we have actually over the last decades have reinforced the image that there's power relationships. So these kind of things plays a role, even in closure, the media. If we look at the imaging of men, you know, through magazines, social media, and platforms like Facebook, Instagram, even our celebrities the kind of manhood that they portray is not an African one. It is very much a modern materialist, far removed from our humanity image. And it cross-cut to women too, but that's not our topic for today. The topic each other and to open this and say, how do we celebrate our manhood and how do we sanction negative manhood, toxic masculinity? Because this is the challenge. It's not go and out there like on gender-based violence to say, we as men, we will stand up for women and we will not let it happen under our name. Because that is for me another form of patriarchy. It just comes with a message, oh, poor woman, shame, you can't help yourself. Let me quickly come and rescue you. And that is wrong. We need to take hands as men. We need to talk ourselves in spaces where we are alone as men, because there is also a trust issue between genders, as we like it or not. We need to talk and we need to be hard and honest with each other and sometimes be brutal and say, I will not tolerate that as being in my engaged across the genders. And there are more than just two genders in Africa. And we need to look at how do we become more inclusive of all these other categories, because all these categories are actually talking back to what we call gender and sexual diversity. And Africa has always celebrated that. LBTI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer, and you can go on and on and on, non-binary and all those things. Those labels are based on power relationships. Because who gave the label? And we need to interrogate that. And why is the label there that makes me other than the person next to me? What makes me in that category to say, maybe I belong to the LGBTI community, but as a man, I'm a lesser man than a man who belongs to the heterosexual community. And I think this is something that we need to interrogate as men, because in many ways, we are the barriers in this space of also even addressing something like gender-based violence. If we keep on doing what we're doing, and that is to categorize our humanity on basis of power relationships. Thank you so much, Juanita. Sorry for this long, but I thought I just want to bring in the conversation.
Fantastic, fantastic, Leon. We really appreciate your insights, absolutely. And we are learning more and more as we go along. Yes, absolutely. Power relationships does spread across all the platforms of society. I've seen it in the ministry. And interestingly enough, I agree with you. It has been very difficult for women in the ministry over the decades, because there are definite patriarchal structures in place in the churches. And you were speaking about the power relationships between men and women as well. And I thought back to, for the attendees, interestingly, I just wanted to bring this comment. You know, in the Old Testament, I don't know if you've ever heard of Deborah in the Old Testament. Women are always portrayed in the Bible as being meek and, you know, frail and dependent, but she was actually a warrior. And there's a scripture in the Bible where her husband says, if you don't ride into battle with me today, Deborah, then I'm not going. And I think as women, we have to revert back to those verses and remind ourselves who we are as women, our womanhood, the power of our womanhood. In the New Testament, Paul, for instance, worked with women. He had women that evangelized with him. And that's not often preached in the churches. They focus on his male counterparts, on his male disciples. But Paul had a great respect, just like Jesus did, as Craig mentioned in the previous session, for women. And not only for their daily tasks, but for their ministry and their anointing. So I appreciate it. I agree. Religion absolutely falls in with all of what we are discussing here. I wanted to add as a comment, as I'm asking the attendees, please, our main question for today, please post your answers in the chat function before I give over to Ngoni. And I also want to introduce Edith. What will make a man and people associated with manly characteristics feel that their point of view is being addressed as a gender equality in their households, community, and society and workplace? Now, my next comment is, Leon, these power relationships, I think often it inhibits the celebration and the affirmation of personhood, because I think it distorts what the relationship should be. So that is what I gathered from what you said, and I've absolutely learned a lot. I'm going to give over to Ngoni now, but before I do, I just want to also welcome Edith, Masiofa, Tapfuna, our wonderful panelist today. She's from Vitality Wellness. We are so glad, Edith, that you joined us. Edith is a seasoned senior development social scientist and strategist with organizational track record working in international organizations in Southern Africa and internationally. Edith is currently leading and managing consultant for Vitality Wellness in Zimbabwe and has previously co-authored a book entitled Tales of Womanhood, Compelling Stories of Resilience and Women's Empowerment. Edith is an expert in promoting private sector sustainability, decent work and diversity management. Edith has a strong background promoting women's economic empowerment, managing HIV and AIDS, wellness, advocacy and policy processes, poverty reduction strategies and gender programming for the private sector, CSOs, FPOs, media, youth and women's organizations. Edith is also a social entrepreneur with interest in empowering women and girls. She is also board chairperson for Safe Haven Zimbabwe, an organization committed to supporting the learning needs of children with autism and providing a parent support network. Edith is a travel enthusiast and she loves cooking for her family. And her favorite meaning, Shona saying, meaning may grace abound, is Nyasha Nakzi Wande. And I'm still waiting for Edith to teach me how to properly pronounce that. So I'm going to give over to Ngoni. Please, Ngoni, can you get into dialogue with Leon on your viewpoint on what is mentioned to us, and then I'll give over to Edith. Thank you. We will also be engaging with the attendees after that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. When Leon was presenting, he reminded me of the pedagogy of the oppressed, and there is a quote that I want to make. Paulo said, the truth is that the oppressed are not marginals, are not living outside society. They have always been inside the structure, which made them beings for others. So the solution is not to integrate them into the structure of oppression, but to transform that structure so that they can become beings for themselves. I thought that was very much critical when you mentioned the issue of dehumanization, oppression, and so forth. So, colleagues, I'm going to share with you to respond to the question. I'll try to summarize so that we have time to engage and discuss. As indicated earlier, I'm Ngoni Chibukire. I'm the country rep for SAfAIDS based here in South Africa. And SAfAIDS, we contribute towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and also human and social development in the SADC region. And this is done by advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights. So we do that through promoting gender equality and social inclusion and resilience and building. So the starting point that I want to bring as we are engaging in this talk show or dialogue, we really need to appreciate that changes in both men's and women's knowledge, attitudes, and behavior are necessary conditions for achieving gender equality and also for promoting harmonious partnerships. So based on the question which says what will make men and people associated with the manly characteristic today feel being part of addressing this discussion we are having about addressing gender equality at 4 levels. We are looking at household, community, society, and workplaces. Based on our experience in implementing gender norms transformation programs, there are about 2 key programs that we have been implementing over the past, I don't know how many years, and also Sweden supported the one in Zimbabwe, Changing the River's Flow. We call it Changing the River's Flow for adults, and also Changing the River's Flow for young people. These programs, they were trying to promote gender equitable kind of relationships to promote better SRHR outcomes, and also to promote gender equality. So based on those programs, of course, it's post ICPD 94. We have seen men being actually engaged, slowly engaged in gender equality programs. Why? Because of we have these women movements, activists, programs at SADC level that are actually talking about promoting gender equality. We have the SADC Gender Protocol, which also promotes involvement of men and women in gender equality work. But you find that it's not the same across the board. So you find that the young, let me call it the metrosexuals, or the young ones, they are likely to engage compared to the traditional men who are really, like what Leon mentioned, deeply rooted in this patriarchal kind of structures. So you find, one, at household level, men, they still believe that they are the head of the family. I remember we wrote a book with Lois, my former executive director, on men as partners, as partners. So it's a belief that men still have at household level. But now you find that even women are breadwinners and are also heads of the family. So that kind of belief and maybe practice is actually changing because of the changes in socio-economic dynamics. Okay, women can do work that men were doing in the past, and men can also do work that women can do. So that's at household level. So we find those kind of challenges that actually perpetuate violence, where men think that, or it's a belief that they are the head. Whatever you say or decisions, they should come from the head of the family, which is actually wrong. At community level or societal level, men are also becoming quite active. We have a program that we are implementing here in South Africa called the Rock Leadership Program. This Rock Leadership Program, we are being supported by the Department of Social Development through SANAC. This program is trying to build the capacity of traditional leaders across the country, 8,300 something of those leaders, to engage on social and structural driver of these problems that we are talking about, the issue of gender-based violence, gender equality. So you find that as you capacitate, as you give skills and competence to the traditional leaders at societal level, they are quite engaging on these issues, though they still feel that in terms of power dynamics, you find that they believe that men still have more power compared to women. But in terms of engagement in gender equality, issues. They are quite active based on what we have found out during implementation of this program, which we are implementing across the eight provinces in South Africa. But the dynamics now differ at workplace sector level. You find that most workplaces are governed by policies. We have, for example, here at SAfAIDS, we have a gender policy. We have a sexual harassment policy. So what it means, men and other people who have manly characteristics, they are sort of, let me use this word, you are forced by the situation then to engage and promote gender equality because of the policies that we have and that we are implementing as organizations. Mainly the formal kind of setups, like formal employment, that's where we have these policies, be it wellness, be it gender equality policies, sexual harassment policies. So in a way, those environments, they actually promote engagement or involvement of both sexes in gender equality discussions. But all in all, we should just say government, civil society should involve, just to summarize this, my response to this question, government and civil society should involve men and boys to achieve gender equality. That's my take on that question. Thank you, Program Director.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Ngoni. Yes, I think it's very important that when we discuss gender-based violence, also discuss gender equality, because it's rooted within the phenomenon of gender-based violence. And I love what Edith also presented to us about the workplace, you know, how the gender-based violence happens in the workplace. And often there aren't structures in place to assist the employees to have that gender equality that they so desperately seek. And I was thinking as you were speaking that, you know, the policies that we follow and are often bound to actually start with the individuals. So I think that's why it's wonderful for us to delineate and bring, you know, this information forward. Like Leon said, we have to open it up completely and look at it, and sometimes maybe be harsh about certain things in the topic within, to bring it to awareness. We often gloss over things, and that is definitely not the way for us to move forward. Then it's just going to be another discussion, and that's not what we want. We want transformation. So I wonder if Edith, if she wants to comment for us on the workplace. Edith, would you agree with me that the policies and the structures are put into place by people, and that's often what's restricting people from coming to the fore? And after Edith has answered, I will engage with Poziza and Lorna, who has given us wonderful comments in the Q&A and in the chat. Thank you, Edith.
Thank you, Juanita. Good afternoon. And thank you, Ngoni and Leon, for those presentations, for those discussion points. And I couldn't help but agree, especially with Leon, when he talked about traditionally, there was no structure of the power dynamics that you observed in African communities. But I also just want to comment a little bit, focusing more on the workplace. If we look at traditional agriculture, for example, you find that both men and women were both engaged in subsistence agriculture, for example. But with the commercialization of agriculture, you find that the trainings for that was given to the men, and that sort of pushed the women out. Then we had a whole era of women not going to work, to formal employment. And the workplace itself was seen as the preserve of men, and there were no women entering into the workplace. And then maybe about 60 or so years ago, we started seeing women also entering into the workspace. And this was faced with a lot of resistance because suddenly the women were also providers. But even when they entered the workplace, you found that this type of careers or jobs that they took up were the soft skills and also very much in service industry. And that picture has maintained to this day. And when you look at mostly management structures, when you speak of gender-based violence within the workplace context, and most of it presents as sexual harassment within the workplace, you find that it then becomes a question of the power dynamics. Even where policies are in place, you find that people don't use those policies for their protection because of the underlying tone sometimes in the workplace that the victims or survivors, to what extent do they feel that the employment contract or the employment relationship is going to be guaranteed? To what extent are they going to be protected from their peers within the workplace so that people don't get to know that they were violated sexually in that manner by their boss or whatever? But mostly because of the issues to do with the economics around it and high unemployment rates in most communities, you find that a lot of gender-based violence within the workplace goes unreported, especially where the perpetrator is in a very senior management or executive position. And we already know that most of these spaces from executive management going up, you find that these spaces are highly dominated by men and women sort of reaching a ceiling in the middle management. So these are some of the things that perpetuate kind of like a boys' club. It continues in the workplace, and even when they know that a peer is violating or abusing minors and getting into sexual relationships with junior staff, men hardly call each other out on that because they take it as part of definition of their masculinities. So in terms of the workspace, we feel that there is a lot of work that needs to be done still to give the women who have entered the workplace the confidence to be able to use those policies for their protection. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely, Edith. As you were speaking, everything ties together for me as we are moving along this webinar series. And I think what's wonderful is that it really brings new perspective. Because I'm thinking of, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of the embarrassment that a woman goes through if she in her workplace, she's a professional and yet she feels she becomes a victim. I mean, there's a certain level of embarrassment. It's a type of oppression. And then we get back to stigma as well. So yes, there are many issues that we are going to address. Many core concepts will come from this. Absolutely. Craig also mentioned that if we heal the men, we heal the nation. And you mentioned that sometimes they feel in the boys' club, you know, it's a display of their power and their manhood. And actually, manhood is not about that. And power is never to be misused. I'm going to read the comment from Lorna Jonathan to everyone. She says, I think it's so important for a man to be a shepherd to his family, to be gentle, handle difficulties with dignity and grace. And this way he will always win the love of his family. Men, remember, you are the role model in your home. Anger is the false show of strength by a weak person, and we've delineated that violence comes from anger, and I even mentioned that anger is pain that hasn't been dealt with. Thus we say with Craig, yes, if we heal the men, we heal our nation. Anger, Lorna says, is the false show of strength by a weak person, a hurt person. Teresa also mentioned hurt people, whilst politeness and a cool mind reflects dignity and strength of a loving person. So we have to transform the way that these perpetrators and the society and even victims, they shouldn't feel that they have to become victims of gender-based violence. They are stronger than that. That we should make these core concepts known, the true meaning of what it means to be strong. To be violent doesn't mean to be strong. I'm going to go into the Q&A, and I would like to address the questions to Leon and Nguni. Pozisa Ngaku says, just a question that came into mind. What makes a man to change when a woman has more power than them? In terms of salary, being independent. It really confuses me, or is it because of the stereotype that men are the head of the family? So Leon, I will let you answer that one first, please, and then Ngoni, thank you.
I think just to pick up what Nguni also said, we must not think that these things are at the individual level. And sometimes I think this is the challenge that we face, that we think that within the individual there is so much power to change society. But actually, in many ways, as a collective, only then things will start to change. And that's why we need to come together as men, start talking about this image of a man to be the provider, the protector, and the one who is actually having the economic power in a relationship. And these things are institutionalized. It's institutionalized in our economical structures, where we still in many, especially South Africa, we are very capitalist, and a lot of who you makes you successful, and you can see it in the media, the adverts. If you look at a successful man, it's somebody with the latest car, it's somebody surrounded by a beautiful woman, it's somebody with a glass of wine or some alcohol in his hand, it's a dress code, which is often a suit, and there's a body type, even a well-built man, and all these things come down to us as individuals to say, how do you measure up? How do you measure up to that image of what a man is? And that makes the media needs to be transformed. The institution of religion must be transformed. The institution of how our government is doing business must be transformed. Our way of, as Edith spoke, how workplaces are structured, because workplaces are actually still, the organizational culture is still a male-dominant one, and historically a white male-dominant middle age. So these archived kind of beliefs and things like that is kept alive by these organizations that actually make sure that those people in power stays in power. And we need to collectively start breaking down those barriers. And that means we need to break the notion that men don't need to be the only provider or don't need to be the higher salary earner. I know of so many couples where the women do earn more than the man. But it's okay. They sat down as a couple, they sat down as loved ones, and they even sat down as a family, with extended family, to actually break down this anxiety, this kind of fear that I'm a lesser man, that I will be called out by other men, that something I lost my manhood because I gave it to my woman. And this is terminologies that I've picked up, that the conversation is my woman. And that means ownership. But then also it's the woman on the other side too, who has to also change this perception. Because sadly our women, and forgive me to call it our women, but women do play a big role in keeping this image alive. Either when they do earn more, I have so many cases of colleagues humiliated by their wives, called out in public spaces, even with raising children, that the power relationship comes in, that the wife will tell the man, you know, I earn more than you, so therefore you don't have a say how we raise the children. And so these things come from both sides. And unless we again come to that space of talking to each other, we cannot change the picture at the biggest scale. And that means at the smaller scale workplaces, we must have men's dialogues. Communities, we have to have community dialogues. social friendship spaces where we have gatherings together and we sit down as friends. We need to talk about this, and we should be brave enough to challenge these kind of beliefs because they are not African. And I think that is where the shift must come in. It cannot happen at individual level. It's only when we join forces.
Yes, absolutely. We mentioned in the previous sessions, I think Leon, you and Craig spoke about it takes a whole village to raise a child. And this is what this purpose, what the webinar series is for, is to educate, learning and bring to the fore learning and education for the village, so that we can understand how we should all change together, like you said, collectively, and approach this. Absolutely, I agree completely with you. I want to ask Ngoni to please give his feedback on that question. I'm going to read it to you, Ngoni.
Okay, thank you very much.
What makes a man? Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me respond to the issue about salary that was raised. I noted the question, Program Director. Thank you very much. I think this question, it has to do with the changing gender relations and decision-making power, because I think these days women also have increased the salaries. They earn more than men, and for this one, men actually feel like they are being challenged in terms of authority. There's a research that I came across. Let me just look here. This research was looking at men's perception on women having more money or income at family level. So this is what one of the respondents actually, I thought maybe I could just share this so that the listener can also hear what these men are thinking about this. So this man said, a man with no money has no voice. Some women make more money, therefore are the final decision makers. I have seen a woman command her husband. You see now, command her husband around because she's the one who maintains him. So you see the power dynamics. If you have the money in terms of decision making, so men, they don't want that. They want to retain that power. You see? And the second one said, a man can make a decision, but eventually the decision will not work because the wife or spouse will have the muscle in terms of the resources, so they can't then make any decision as men. So you see, it's a power dynamic kind of question. But as I indicated earlier, you know, socio-economic environment are changing, and because of there are three things that I want to mention. Issue of access to education. We so many women are also. That's why we have you here as women facilitating. You see, that's empowerment.
Amen. Preach it.
You see now, so things are changing in terms of access to education. The second issue is access to pay. It's one of the economic empowerment indicator that we also track. You see, then the political participation and so forth. So you find that women, they even get more, or things are changing. So as men, we should appreciate and understand that things are changing. It's for the better, actually. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, Ngoni. Absolutely. I loved your comment. Yes. I was thinking as you were speaking, you know, about women that haven't had the chance. There are many girls that haven't had the chance in their lives to have a proper education. And Ngoni, you are so correct. You know, even in the ministry, I've seen the most anointed women through the patriarchy being told they are there to put the tablecloths on and to pour the tea. And I believe that we are stealing from society, like Leon said, those queens that were reigning in the African contents, where we could have learned so much from the way, the wisdom that they applied. But somehow with the rise of the power relationships and the patriarchy coming into place, we are losing core concepts for us as society. So yes, I agree completely with you. I have a lovely comment. I've got lovely comments and questions. I just want to read this comment from Anne Jensen. She is our participant, our attendee from Sweden. Welcome, Anne. She says, when we learn to not judge another or a situation with our own personal and critical opinions or ideas, a better communication can be had. She says, I personally cannot have a peaceful, fruitful discussion or communication with another if I'm immediately going to judge them based on my own ideas or whether they are a man or a woman. We can never always agree, but respecting another based on who they are, not whether they are male or female. She says, I personally remove all those factors, and as Leon said, we talk and resolve it as humans. I learned to remove the man or woman notion and replace it with human through my late beloved daughter. She battled with her sexuality from a teenager to adulthood. Above all, it did not matter what she was in terms of choice of gender. She, above all, was my child and an awesome human being. Thank you so much for that wonderful testimony, Anne. And I think it's fantastic that you feel free to share that with us, because that is why we are here. The village is here to learn a better way forward. The next is from TRB Monesi. She says she's attending from Lesotho, and she says as a young woman, she's realized that in the attempt to empower women and members of the LGBTQI community, there has been a trend to demean heterosexual men, thereby tipping the scale all the way over to the other side. I feel that to properly discover ways to empower women, men have to be part of the conversation. Without this, we are trying to solve oppression with oppression. Not that women need permission from men to rise from oppression, but we've seen throughout history how societies react to drastic changes in its systems. We've seen instances where male allies have advocated for women's rights, only to be told that they have no place to be talking about women's issues. Your thoughts on this question, Leon, on this comment? And then Ngoni, please.
Yeah, you see, again, we live in this categorized society that even we categorize the spaces of conversations. We often come into spaces that we say, when I say, because I got a men's group that I am running at university, and when I try to explain to the women's side that there's spaces that we as men just want to be together so that we can talk brother to brother. It is very uncomfortable to say that because it sounds very exclusive. It sounds like we again go to the other side of a pendulum and we're creating another form of exclusivity. And on the other hand, we found women in conversations where, men are not allowed. And sadly, this just keep on this kind of divided societies that we live in, because it plays out in spaces of race, it plays out in spaces of religion, that we cannot find each other, that the differences become the barriers of finding our humanity. And even on the connotation of LBTI, you suddenly get something that we say, people become the intolerant of the intolerant. So it means we become intolerant of people who are intolerant to like LBTI. But aren't we doing the same thing that we're actually fighting against? And that is the problem in this space when it comes to gender equality, that we are becoming intolerant of the intolerant. So we're doing exactly what we're actually fighting against. And we will not conquer or not overcome this in a way unless we come into spaces of conversations. And it's not structural conversations. It starts with you talking to your child and talk these things through, talking to your friends. You know, sit down at social gatherings and interrogate the space. Look at the way you sit at a restaurant. I often like to look at how people do table arrangements, that you find the men on one side of the table sitting together and the women sit together, because there's this notion that women like to talk about the children and household things, and the men would like to talk about work and other stuff. And therefore we divide the spaces. And our children sees that. Our children sees that, and they relearn that space continuously. And that means that we have to even rethink and become more reflective ourselves in how do we actually use social spaces to keep the divide. And that is for me the most important part, that we start at our family, household, social spaces, we start to change there. And it will create a ripple effect. And it will change the community, the society, and ultimately even the world.
Yes. I stand in agreement with you, Leon. Thank you for that excellent answer. Just in case of us not reaching our time, Ngoni, there is another question in the Q&A function. May I just mention, if our session runs out, please email your question to southafrica@goldenkey.org and we will be able to respond. We will send it on to the panel and the presenters and respond to you. So should we run out of time, I'm going to post the next question to Ngoni in the Q&A function. It's from Nkubani Matthew Dabengwa. I appreciate the very strategic approach to this talk and the way most of these things are interconnected. My question is in the movement of getting men to call each other out and to address issues surrounding the toxic masculinity and misogyny. I don't know if I said that right. How do we unpack and transform mindsets of men, particularly the youth, from a practical point of view? What steps can we take as communities in shifting the narrative? How can we advance and paint a form of positive masculinity and what it even means to be a man? Thank you, Ngoni.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Let me just share from a practical, because they want practical kind of solutions. So I will cite one of the programs that we implemented in Zimbabwe called Changing the River's Flow for Young People. So this program we were implementing in partnership with the Sonke Gender Justice. They are our partner here in South Africa. So this program used the gender norms transformation approach. So what we did, so it's very important, let me say it's good to catch them young, so that at least as they grow, they can promote equitable kind of gender relations. So what we were doing, what we did actually is to build the capacity of champions at schools. We're working with the 24 schools, secondary schools. So we identified what we called the Changing the River's Flow champions for young people. So these champions were trained at national level together with their teachers. So they were part of these champions, the teachers from these, or educators, let me use educators here in South Africa, say educators, the teachers. So they were part of these champions who then went back to their schools to form what we called Changing the River's Flow clubs at schools. So you find that we then had these sessions with them, practical kind of sessions, looking at the life skills, the relationship, managing relationships, sexual reproductive health issues, part of the CSC agenda, the comprehensive sexuality education. So they went through an intense 11 sessions throughout the course of the 2 years that we were implementing the program. But what we did also to make this practical, we also engaged the parents of these participating in the school clubs, and we empowered them also as parents. So we find that it was quite useful. So what we did then at the end of the program, we had a gender scorecard that we tracked. So if you give the skills, if you catch them young, if you teach them life skills, it helps them in transforming the way how they relate. I prepared a slide to share with our viewers in terms of how then their perceptions changed over the 3 years. So you find that when we started, they believed that, okay, for example, boys, men are more important than women or girls. Those are kind of things that we're tracking. So at the end of the program, we could see that these young people that we worked with over the 2 years, 3 years that we're implementing the program, they actually changed. So it's about the methodology that you use to impart skills, to build competencies among these young people that really matter. So those are some of the practical things that we have been doing as an organization. And another program, what we did, what we call Young Women First program that we started way back working with Ford Foundation. We identified nine young women that we worked with for about 3-4 years using our modules that we have created, because we have a youth leadership program that we run as an organization. So you find that all the 9 girls that started that Young Women First program, one is a politician now in Zambia, is a member of parliament. The other one is in Zimbabwe. She has started her own organization. The other one is working with for a donor. The other one is in business. So you find that if you have those kind of practical sessions, you build their competence, their skills, and it helps in promoting again these gender equitable relationships. So those are some of the examples. I have many, but for the sake of time, let me end here.
Wonderful, wonderful, Ngoni. Yes, I agree with you completely. And that's why you are making such an impact on all the organizations working in this field. And that's also what we want to do through this webinar series, is this knowledge only has impact if we put it over into practicality, how to do it. I'm going to give over to Leon Roots from UNISA just before I close this session. Unfortunately, we are out of time. In a minute, Leon, please, can you just explain to us the concept of children as the agents of change? And then I'll be closing this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita, and thank you. I think we had a really good conversation, and you can see we just broke the ice. And this should really go into a deeper discussion, and like maybe in the future, we even break up in smaller groups. So just to also pick up what Nguni say, but to also caution ourselves, we must be very careful putting some of the burden that we as adults have on our young people. I had a case where we were talking once with a young group of men, and we were talking about the notion of black tax. And this young man stood up and he said he's actually so angry at his parents. And, you know, you feel that they're very selfish and everything. And we said, no, okay, tell us more. He said, no, his mother and father decided to have another child, and they didn't consult with him. So first reaction was we had a bit of a laugh, which was wrong, because it also, again, that typical male perception that, you know, how can you're supposed to provide to your extended, your family, and, you know, our response was laughing. But then he said, you know, as the person who at this stage is carrying the burden, the economic burden as a young person, trying to get employed, try to make some living and find existence, to carry that burden to also take care of the extended family. And suddenly his parents were becoming parents again. and they didn't talk to him because suddenly there's another economic burden coming in. And then it just makes us realize, again, it must be a conversational thing, that we cannot shift our responsibility, the burden that we must share, suddenly to young people and expect things to change. It is a shared responsibility. It is something that every one of us must play our part. So just to also say thank you so much from UNISA side for this. I really appreciate it. I'm actually very excited. Please let's keep on the conversation and post in whatever you want and get more information. And let's keep the conversation go on as men and as people who are caring about men. So let us please keep this conversation. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anne Jensen says in the chat function, Leon, thank you for another fruitful session for Ngoni and Edith and Leon. We solve issues together, not alone. And then I've got a lovely comment here also from Lorna. She says to all our brilliant speakers, Leon Roots from UNISA, Ngoni Chibukero from SAfAIDS, and Edith Masiofa Tapfuna from Vitality Wellness, for everyone that was engaged today, thank you for the wonderful work that you do. May God bless you and continue to use you in a very special way. God has blessed you with this outstanding gift. And I just commend you all on the level of information that was presented with the passion and the heart for people. Thank you very much. We really enjoyed this session. Attendees, you are absolutely amazing. We look forward to our next session, which is on Thursday. And our presenters will be Lizette Leroux from UNISA, Edith Masiofa Tapfuna, who is with us today from Vitality Wellness, Mr. Risa Kanyane as well from SAfAIDS, and myself from Golden Key, Southern Africa. We will also have Craig Wilkinson from Father a Nation as Emcee, and Prof. Nokutula Mazibuko from UNISA. So please don't miss our session on Thursday on nature and types of gender-based violence. It is going to commence at 1 p.m. on Thursday. Thank you very much for joining us today. Please come with your questions. We want to engage. We want to continue this dialogue. And as Leon said, we've only but scratched the surface. I can't believe that we're already heading to session 6. So we are loving this time with you. You may now leave this session by clicking the end button. From Golden Key, Southern Africa, we say thank you and have a lovely week, and we'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye.